Menopause is not just a reproductive shift, it's a metabolic turning point. It's not just about hot flashes or mood swings, it's about how your body changes at its core. Your metabolism shifts, your fat redistributes, and the way your body manages fuel evolves in powerful ways. And here's the key. This isn't a short transitional phase. Perimenopause and postmenopause together make up 30 to 40% of a woman's lifespan. That means that how you navigate this stage and the years afterward sets a trajectory for your long-term health span. I'm Shriya from the clinical team at Healthspan, and today I am thrilled to be joined by our senior health coaches, Kristen and Rich. As Rich is one of our resident metabolic health experts, and Kristen is a master at helping women use lifestyle strategies to feel and function their best. Today, together, we'll be diving into one of the most important but often overlooked transitions in women's health, menopause, specifically looking at the profound metabolic shifts that come with it. Now, before we dive in, welcome Rich and Kristen. Kristen, let me come to you. In your view, why does menopause represent such a critical turning point in women's health?
It's great to join in on the conversation. Our ovaries show signs of aging decades before other tissues, really putting women at a distinct disadvantage since hormones touch so many different aspects of health, from metabolic, bone, cardiovascular, neurological, and overall health. The loss of ovarian function negatively impacts our health, well-being, and longevity, leading to many adverse health outcomes. So it's really important to get a handle on this and help women with this. Here at Healthspan, we mainly focus on low-dose rapamycin to help preserve ovarian function. We've seen a gap in the care of menopausal women who are struggling and not receiving the support they need.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a story we've been hearing a lot, just not adequate level of support in our current medical system. Rich, welcome. Would you like to add on to what Kristen shared?
Yeah, great to be here, as always. Nice to be with you and Kristen as well. So I just wanted to repeat for emphasis, the peri-postmenopause life stage, or the combination of those life stages, is about 1/3 of lifespan for women. That's not insignificant. And as a result, it's something that needs to be considered. The average age of menopause officially is between 50 and 51 years old, depending on what study you're looking at, if it's the SWAN study or some of the other investigations and clinical trials around menopause. There's, 20, 30 plus years, hopefully, after that occurs, where health span and metabolic health are all impacted. So kind of taking a step back in my own effort to learn more about menopause. What is menopause? Why is menopause? I would almost consider it, like, in some cases, a biological injustice in some capacity, this inflection point, there's challenges associated. And it comes up in coaching all the time. I'm male and I'm trying to relate and help and support patients or people that I'm working with in the coaching sector. There seems to be, up until very recently, just a paucity of research available. The cessation of menstruation, I guess, is like, after about 12 months, technically then menopause is defined as that 12 months without a menstrual cycle. In my efforts to learn more about why menopause exists, looking at different biological comparisons across different mammalian species, there's not many species actually that display this or experience this. It's called menopause, which is permanent cessation of ovulation outside of humans. So there are some big brain creatures that are, where intelligence, education are very highly prioritized. Humans, orcas, some other whale, mammal related species, including, narwhals, beluga whales, hybrids like narlugas, if anyone's familiar with narlugas. All of these species have some kind of stop to reproduction, and then lifespan continues on. Some of the overwhelming hypotheses out there, theories about why menopause exists, is that because education and wisdom are so important, and because it's such an effort to nurture and grow future generations, that having females have a longer lifespan, one, and then two, be able to contribute after reproduction is super important. So yeah, happy to be here. This is a really cool topic. Deserves way more focus. I'm glad to be here learning from Kristen and yourself today.
Yeah, that is something I did not know. When I was in school, you learn about like mammal biology. You learn that mammals have the similar reproductive system. So in my brain, I think all mammals went through menopause. So that was actually something I didn't fully process, that it was just certain species. You mentioned the theory about having postmenopausal women help societies, and they're a key part of helping the younger generation. I know there was another theory in one of the papers you shared that we used to only live till about 55 years old. So it made sense that menopause kind of went till there. Now we're living much, much longer, and it's like our ovaries aren't keeping up with how long we're living. So that one is another theory that really sticks with me. So thank you for sharing that. We're here today. We know kind of what is happening during menopause. We don't fully know the why of menopause, but we're going to talk more about what is actually happening. And we're going to focus on those metabolic shifts. Now, whenever I talk about metabolic shifts with folks, I find that it's a pretty vague term. Even for myself, I think if someone says, oh, my metabolism has changed, I immediately think, oh, they're talking about a slower metabolism. They're finding that they're gaining weight from eating certain foods. But there's actually so much more to metabolic shifts. And there are measurable changes that we can see. Rich, I know you had a cool graph. I was wondering if you could pull that up. One of the first and most key things we know about menopause is that there is this reduction in estrogen and progesterone, which are these two key hormones.
Yeah, definitely. So starting with menopause, there's metabolic shifts, which we'll get into. The process itself often is associated with a decline in estrogen production and cessation of menstruation. If you look at a visual here, we can see that premenopause, there's undulations. They're rhythmic, they're cyclical, and they're pretty regular or expected in terms of what they look like. Cycles. With perimenopause, there's a lot more volatility in hormone levels. They trend over time, over the course of years potentially, is a reduction in estrogen and progesterone levels. Sometimes testosterone levels are impacted too. During perimenopause, you can see this erratic nature of hormones, and that sometimes, actually, in many times, is associated with signs, symptoms, challenges, experiences associated with perimenopause. After you get to, kind of into your late perimenopause or the early stages of postmenopause, where you have your final menstrual period, you can see that the hormone levels, estrogen and progesterone, have kind of nearly flatlined, or at least established a new baseline that's much lower. Pre and perimenopause levels tended to be on average. That does have a huge impact. These hormones are powerful. They have a metabolic impact, along with several other areas, which I know we're going to dive into.
So we see estrogen, estradiol, and progesterone both going down, but you mentioned testosterone is not one that we see decreasing. We see it increasing. Is that correct?
There's a relative increase in testosterone, primarily related to the estrogen and progesterone levels coming down.
Okay.
So the ratio of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, that shifts in a way that testosterone becomes, I guess, a much more significant contribution to adipose tissue distribution and fat storage. Cardiovascular risk is higher for males than females in the premenopause comparison. During perimenopause, postmenopause, that flips, which again is more context, more reason why that we need to be working within this area, focusing here to help support and improve Healthspan and some biomarkers associated with metabolic health, especially around this transition, and then within the time frame of postmenopause for sure.
Got it. So we're basically seeing that when there is this increased ratio of testosterone, it's going to influence how our body is storing adipose tissue. So that increased ratio of testosterone, we would see more of that visceral fat in the abdominal region. Is that correct?
Abdominal, centrally located fat storage or adipose tissue deposition is more common with higher testosterone levels or higher relative testosterone levels. There was a study from 2003 where they looked at the rate of change in relative testosterone levels for women that are going through peri and postmenopause. What they found is that with these slower shifts in relative testosterone levels, there was changes in this adipose tissue deposition. So that's one, hormone to kind of factor in. Another one would be FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone. Those increase in that level of that hormone does increase with menopause and aging generally. So this does impact males as well. Because adipose tissues have FSH receptors on fat cells, you tend to store fat differently there too. There's definitely hormonal impact associated with the adipose tissue storage.
So, adipose tissue is just one piece of that kind of physical changes puzzle. What other physical changes do we tend to see in peri and postmenopausal women?
There's a common term, basically like a body recomposition, that's challenging to do, but it's kind of like the holy grail of weight loss. If you can exchange fat for lean mass and become, you know, higher percentage lean mass than you were before, that's ideal. In menopause, there's a bit of the opposite that takes place where the shifts in hormone levels that we just discussed, especially the reduction in estrogen, can cause lean mass to shift, reduce in lean mass does impact bones, which I'm sure we'll get into, because there's this lean mass reduction and also can contribute to BMR decreases or basal metabolic rate. So if your normal basal metabolic rate is 1600 calories a day, you can expect a reduction. In some cases, research suggests it's between 200, 250, maybe even up to 300 calories a day. This does make an impact in terms of the nutritional approach to menopause, making sure that you're accounting for that in some capacity, especially, and I know we're going to get into, Kristen, probably loop you in here. I know you work with folks considerably on minimally processed foods and nutrition and things. Do you find that that's enough? I know there's the one really cool study Kevin Hall was a part of where they had people do a minimally processed diet versus a highly processed, ultra processed food diet. And they just said, eat till you're full. There was a 500 calorie difference in the consumption associated with a minimally processed food, basically contributed to a lot less calories consumed because of the satiety benefits associated with healthier minimally processed food. So I don't know if this comes up in coaching or how often you're reaching into that research to share with folks.
The calorie component is really important. And I think a lot of patients notice that the things that they've been doing in the past that worked stopped working. So it's really a matter of fine tuning and strategizing and really looking at the quality of the diet, minimizing processed foods, minimizing sugar, minimizing alcohol. Those little tweaks really do add up.
That's been my experience.
So we're seeing with this basal metabolic rate, Kristen, you mentioned changes to how folks are handling glucose. And I know that one of the things we tend to see with menopause is insulin resistance. I'm coming back to Rich because you're our insulin resistance expert. Could you talk about what that connection is?
Some of it actually connects to what we just kind of laddering into or stacking onto what we were talking about with adipose tissue, or in exchange for, lower lean mass. Skeletal muscle is a very important glucose sink, if you will, or basically it's a major site of glucose and carbohydrate metabolism. People with less lean mass or less muscle mass have a harder time disposing of glucose. That usually results in less margin for error in terms of how many carbs you can eat without having fat storage or other undesirable consequences. Hormone shifts, reductions in estrogen and important reproductive hormones can change your insulin sensitivity and produce more insulin resistance. Was recently listening to a really good podcast where there was a bit of a roundtable, and Dr. Gabrielle Lyon was talking about her experiences and her clinical experience working with different folks. She brought up the point of carb tolerance or glucose tolerance. I just wanted to bring that up for conversation. I know Kristen and I have chatted about that on numerous occasions, but I think that's one area where you can clue in or cue in with a coach to take a look at, or maybe investigate if you have CGM. You can look at your personal ability to manage carbs and watch it, especially in this transitional period, because many people, especially if they're not super active, their carb tolerance is lower than they expect, but then also becomes lower over time during this peri-postmenopause phase.
It seems like a CGM is a really important tool that can help you see how you're processing different foods. Kristen, in your experience, have you worked with folks that are using CGMs during this stage?
Yes. Yeah. I definitely love using a CGM because it gives you real-time insights into how your body is processing carbohydrates. I know, like for myself, like usually 30 grams or more, it's a little bit too much for me. And I know that just from experience, and a lot of women that I've worked with experience that as well. But yeah, CGM is just such a great tool. And I love incorporating CGM even just a month or two throughout the year, just to kind of check in and see how your glucose response is doing, because it can vary. And so it's really good to check in on that.
Would you think that folks would notice this even without a CGM based on how they're feeling after eating different foods?
Yeah, definitely. I like to call it a carb coma. If you have carbs during the day and you just feel like you want to take a nap afterwards, that's one indication that you're not really handling carbs very well. I see that pretty often.
feel like I have had carb coma since I was a child, which is not boding well for my future, it seems. All right. So the CGM being one of our tools. Now, we talked about a bunch of different shifts, the adipose tissue, the lean mass reduction, insulin resistance. Now, the last thing I did want to touch on is how this links back to our cardiovascular health. I think when we think about metabolism, we think about heart health pretty closely together. What kind of changes are we seeing? I know we here at Healthspan measure lipid panels as part of our regular testing. So, what are you all seeing? Rich, I'll start with you on that one.
It's common to see LDL, low density lipoprotein or LDL cholesterol often going up, triglycerides potentially going up, HDL can go down. So it's kind of this holistic or comprehensive shift in your lipid panel that might be less ideal. So it's good to monitor that. There's context of metabolic changes associated with menopause. Estrogen, these hormones definitely play a big role, but there's other lifestyle impacts as well, that it's kind of a cumulative effect of your nutrition, your physical activity over, there's just a bit more opportunity when you're, for example, Kristen brought up the CGM and her own experience, and definitely would encourage that as well. If you've not tried a CGM, they're available now over the counter. Even if you don't plan to get one routinely or continuously use this CGM device, you could do so kind of as Kristen explained, once, twice a year, just to check in, just to see where you're at, see what is going on in terms of when you eat certain foods or when you eat normal foods, how your body responds. If you're seeing these glucose spikes that are 160, 180, 200 or more, there was something in the last meal snack, something that you ate that was not agreeing with you. So within that same context, watching your lipid panels, getting routine lab work done, super important. Just as, I just saw something recently where it's like your body ages in kind of these three main kind of like it levels up in terms of like how, your age is manifest. So like at 34, I guess there's this like level up where you're like, you're not 20 anymore. You don't, your body doesn't respond that way. I guess the other one is right around 60, 65, and then 78 years old.
It was the
Study
article
exactly
that
that
I
they
wrote
did.
about, I'm pretty sure. It's the waves of
Okay.
aging.
Yeah, it was super fascinating. And at the very least, those are some interesting points where you might want to invest in the CGM and do this more significant workup to monitor things on the metabolic health side for sure.
Yeah. I think I know what papers you're referencing. It's like we age in waves, which means that it's not a linear progression, jump, and so
Yes.
on,
Three
which
big
is
stairs that you jump up.
so we went through a bunch of different changes that are happening. Now, here's the question that I'm left with. What is it that our hormone levels are decreasing and they're causing metabolic shifts? Is it that as we age, we change our diets and we're having these metabolic shifts that are impacting hormones? Is it all just one pathway together? I'm not, that's kind of the question that lingers for me. Either of you have any thoughts on that?
Just based on the metabolic health or the cardiovascular risk equation, males have higher risk up until postmenopause occurs. Postmenopause is brought about by pretty dramatic, volatile, or relatively abrupt shifts in hormone levels. Looking at some of like, I guess some of the more, looking at the extreme example, if you will, or the more significant example where hormone levels go from normal homeostasis to near zero or zero, like surgical menopause, removal of ovaries or something like that. The data they suggest that the risk is higher. So the more abrupt your shift in hormones, the I guess to me that preempts or kind of moves the needle towards challenges within the metabolic health space. It doesn't discount some of the other stuff like lifestyle effects that might have accumulated or as life got busy, as jobs, family, career, stresses kind of all accumulate in addition to aging. So you're getting older throughout this process where stress is getting higher simultaneously. I think there's a combination. The hormone levels probably precipitate it and then it can snowball from there.
Yeah,
Kristen, what do you think?
I would say I agree with the hormone piece. Hormones touch so many aspects of our health and they're integral to so many different things that when they drop off, it has a domino effect. As we get older, we kind of let things, convenience kind of slip in or little things slide here and there. Other things take precedence over our own well being and health. Those little things can add up over time to further contribute to the detrimental effects of lower hormones. It can be a combination of both. It's like the chicken or the egg situation, but yeah, the hormone drop off is definitely a significant turning point.
So it's almost like we know the hormones will drop. The other aspects are kind of what we can control. The hormones are in that piece where it's not always in our control. Though we will talk about it. We have some
Yeah.
things we can go into there.
For
Rich,
sure.
you mentioned something about the abrupt shift of hormones that happens in surgically induced menopause. You had shared a paper from the International Journal of Women's Health, and it was about the length of menopause duration. And
Mm.
it made me think of what you said because you mentioned, oh, in these like sudden shift of hormones, right? We see these side effects that people have right after their surgical procedures. But then in this study, what they saw was that the longer that change in hormone period lasted, the more the risk was for metabolic syndrome. Do you think that those kind of go hand in hand? I feel like to me, they seem like two almost different opposite ideas. What do you think?
I would tend to agree. They almost oppose each other. Within the data associated with like surgical menopause, it usually is associated with like longer term risk, mortality risk. So maybe not morbidity risk associated as well. But so it's usually on a longer time frame. This particular study that you're mentioning was super cool, first of all, and probably warrants some more discussion. So I'll probably have some practical application questions that I don't know if we have answers to, but at least we'll toss them out there. Maybe someone will either do some really cool research or we can collectively pursue some answers over time. This was a 2024 study, as you had mentioned. They were looking at 700 women that were excluded were anyone on hormone replacement therapy, surgical menopause, chemo, or radiation. Chemo and radiation exposure can kind of preempt or make this abrupt shift in like ovarian function and things that would be similar, but not the same as surgical menopause, but it could be more abrupt. What they found, like you're saying, is the menopause duration. There was two groups. They grouped people based on if you had a menopause transition that was less than 5 years or more than 5 years. And the ones that had menopause transition that was 5 years or more, there was a it was more than 6.4 fold increased risk for metabolic syndrome. So that was fascinating. It does seem like you don't want to be in this menopause transition for a super long time. The amount of stress, the lack of sleep, the vasomotor symptoms, like all of this kind of compiles. Doesn't mean that real life just turns off necessarily during all of this. You're managing normal life, which is hard and stressful, but then you layer this on top. I could see where if your menopause transition was extended 5+ years, it does increase your risk of it, especially on the metabolic syndrome side. Within the same study, they also looked at, they did this regression model to figure out like what's really impacting metabolic syndrome risk. Number one by far was the duration of menopause or the perimenopause transition point. The other was related to central adiposity. So according to the regression model, they showed that women with the elevated visceral adipose index, which is not quite like a BMI, but one of these alternative indices we've discussed before, Shriya, they had a twofold increase in risk for metabolic syndrome. Worse things to monitor, right? You could look at waist to hip ratio, BMI, triglycerides, HDL. They looked at a lot of different things, but those two stuck out, at least in my opinion, as huge markers, which leads to the question, how do you know how long your menopause, like your individual menopause experience, like how I know it's heavily genetics based. So I suppose you talk to your mom, your grandmother, women in your family, but then how do you manipulate it? If you're concerned that like, hey, my genetics might be on the longer side, 5+ years, I'm not exactly sure I have answers to either of those that are concrete. This is what we have to do, or this is what you might want to emphasize, but I'll drop those there for Shriya and
Yeah.
Kristen. I'd love to hear your input.
Lots of thoughts from that. The first one really is how do you figure out what your average is? Kristen, I don't know about you, but I know in my family, my grandma never talked to me about menopause. I think that is a common trend across cultures, across different women. It's not something we talk about as often. So I don't even have the answer to that for myself personally.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really either. It's like it wasn't anything ever talked about. I know my mom, she went through menopause at 48, which is considered fairly young. And she didn't do any HRT or anything like that, and now is kind of dealing with some osteoporosis as well. She didn't really have any symptoms with menopause, but there's some underlying factors that are still happening that now she's having to deal with.
Yeah, and I think our moms may be similar ages, so they were probably hitting this stage at a time where the research wasn't really there, right? There wasn't information on getting HRT. Actually, from a lot of physicians, it was looked down upon to go do HRT. So
Or
even
dangerous.
now, when I tell my mom and I'm like, "Oh, you should go ask about this," she's like, I don't know about that." This hesitancy, right? Because for so long, the research hasn't been there, and so folks are still learning about what's out there for them. Now, the one thing this made me think of too is that we talked about the time spent in menopause. So we don't want to be in menopause for this 5-year period. We also don't want a sudden shift in hormones. We want this middle ground, probably. But then there's a lot of protocols, I'm thinking specifically even rapamycin, where we're trying to delay the age of onset. And it makes me question, does the age of onset matter then? Or what is it that the time spent in menopause matters more? I don't have the answer. I don't know if you all have any thoughts on that. That's just kind of where my head is right now.
I have a couple thoughts.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Kristen, you mentioned your mom being in the 48 range, which is on the lower end. If onset or if like classification of menopause is 50-51, according to the more prominent clinical trials, being at 48, that's early. If you are in kind of like your low 40s or, you're on the early side of terms of like when you kind of reach that menopause definition of 12 consecutive months without a menstrual cycle, that does put you at higher risk. So I guess a couple of things that we can establish is you don't necessarily want to go into menopause range earlier. And I know that there's active research. We've had some research reviews that Healthspan put out on delaying menopause. I often am asked about from various people in the Healthspan community, "Hey, I'm interested in delaying menopause. Can you tell me about rapamycin?" There's some research there. It's a growing field of research. I wouldn't say there's volumes and volumes of data at this point. So I do think there's a couple things that we can at least kind of plant a flag for now. Science changes. But as of right now, it seems like you don't want to be in menopause super early. So if you can delay it to 50, 51, or past that, you might be good. I think it's in that transition, that perimenopause state where things are volatile. There is a calm, I guess, that happens once you reach menopause, as I understand it. Looking at other research, it doesn't seem that your symptoms maybe ever go to premenopause baseline levels, according to the research that I'm familiar with. It'd be worth pausing here to chat a little bit about different things that might be worth considering in this range.
Kristen, anything you want to add on there?
I think they're both important. Like the age of onset for menopause, I was looking at the Oviva Therapeutics research where they're using anti-Müllerian hormone or inhibition to preserve ovarian function and delay menopause, kind of like similar to rapamycin functionality. And if we can preserve ovarian function longer, then that significant drop off happens later and kind of can preserve that, which I think is key. And then also like during that time of perimenopause where there's that fluctuation in hormones, I think there's a lot of things that we can do to help balance the body and manage that better, including nutrition, lifestyle, and hormone replacement therapy that can help manage that time or make it shorter as well.
What I want to do right now is, as we know, we end up doing a lot of research on the science behind why we're feeling the way we are, what's going on. And then what we sometimes miss is what can we actually do about it? So I really want to, for our time, the rest of our time together, really touch base on what can patients do? What are you seeing in your work? So Kristen, I'd love to start with you. Could you talk a little bit about what you've seen in your work thus far?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, many patients share that what they've been doing before just isn't working anymore. That's very common, specifically for weight management. And that's where fine tuning lifestyle strategies, data tracking like CGM, factoring in our metabolic coaching can really be helpful. And like even on the flip side, I've seen patients where they have challenges keeping weight on. So it just goes to show how different this can be for patients. So it's really about personalization. And, our health coaching programs really help to support women through menopause and perimenopause. We personalize strategies with regular check-ins, data-driven assessments, accountability to keep track and on progress. So that's kind of what we're seeing.
All right. Rich, what do you think? Anything you want to add from your experience?
My experience within this realm, metabolic health or menopause, I'm still working on the answer because two things that Kristen said stick out. seemed like, well, maybe it's a few things. Previously, you both mentioned like that there, I don't know if it's a taboo or just like a lack of discussion. Maybe you didn't hear from your grandmother, or maybe you heard a little bit, but not a ton from your mom or aunts or different women in your family about what menopause was like and their experience because it just isn't discussed enough. I think that's changing, not maybe as quickly as it should. But what I was finding as I'd be getting on these discovery calls, welcome calls, or meeting new people in coaching situations, it was coming up a lot. The exact story that Kristen shared, where the frustration level was high, not knowing what to do because everything that used to work doesn't work anymore. And then as a coach, I was really motivated to help and support that and try to work through a lot of that. There's just so much going on, so much nuance, layers, and complexity that prompted me to do a ton of research, and I continue to do more research. Even this morning, I was like rabbit holing on all kinds of stuff about the biological utility of menopause in general. Seemed to be an interesting, why is it there? I still don't know exactly, but it's a fascinating field of research if you ever get a chance to take a look. Either way, layering on all these individual experiences, the variability in terms of navigating this is super fascinating. What works now, or the challenge that you're solving now, can shift so much because of the volatility associated with hormones and symptoms. Having an amazing Healthspan coach like Kristen makes all the difference because you've got this support person that you can talk to, and she just has this ridiculous volume of knowledge to help manage exercise, nutrition, supplements. I'm sure we'll get into a variety of that so that you can feel good. You have some kind of footing to move forward. Because I think in many ways, just this whole menopause thing is like this sea of, you're kind of a boat floating on this menopause wave structure that's like, you don't know how to move because everything tends to not work the way you expect it to. There's a lot of unknowns going on. So I think a couple things for sure that line up exactly with what Kristen was saying.
Let's jump to Kristen. Kristen, you are our expert interventionist. What levers, when you talk to patients, what do you tell them to target? What can we do?
Yeah, so there's a lot of options, which is great because there are things that we can control that can make an impact. One of the things, I think like the two things are kind of similar, exercise and nutrition. I was deciding which one to talk about first because I think they're both so important. But I decided to talk about exercise, physical activity first because as we get older, this piece of the puzzle gets a little bit harder. And it's one of the most important tools during menopause, especially resistance training and maintaining muscle mass as we age. Because as we age, anabolic resistance increases. So we need more stimulus to get the same anabolic response that we did when we were younger, which is kind of a bummer, but kind of the fact of what happens. Estrogen also helps to maintain muscle mass. As it declines, we naturally lose it unless we actively work to preserve it. So I like to think of it, it's like resisting the entropy of comfort. In a way, our culture makes it easy to move less and choose convenience, but our bodies thrive when we lean into a little bit of a challenge within our abilities, of course. So just enough to spark that adaptation and maintain strength over time. I think it's really, really important for this phase. Rich mentioned before, muscle is our metabolic sink. It's like a sponge that soaks up all of that glucose from the bloodstream without the need of insulin. So you're not spiking insulin, but you're getting that glucose into the cells where it's needed. The more muscle you have, the more capacity you have to manage blood sugar, burn energy, keep your weight steady, all those important things that we want. And without that, extra glucose is more likely to be stored as fat, especially around the midsection. With weight training, I recommend starting low and slow, even with just bands. You don't need to go too crazy, but try to work up to 2 times a week at a minimum. Aerobic and mitochondrial training is also really important. I'd say most women do better avoiding long, super intense cardio sessions. You don't really need to do that. Making sure we're including daily movement, like taking the stairs instead of the elevator, getting up throughout the day, doing some, we call them exercise snacks. You just do 10 air squats throughout the day or going up and down the stairs. Things like that are also really helpful for managing blood sugar too. As far as exercise guidelines, they recommend doing 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity activity each week, or 75 to 100 minutes of like more vigorous activity, kind of like that HIIT training, which is important to include at least once a week, I like. And even being towards the higher end, we see that helps that metabolic shift even more. But just getting in what you can is really important. And also including that weight training or that resistance training is important.
Yeah, I feel like there's a bunch of different levers just within that exercise bucket that we can target. I wonder when you're working with folks, do you find, I know personally, like I'm listening to all these and I'm like, where would I fit them all in a week? How do I even get all of this in? So I wonder, is that kind of where you're coming in with your patients? You're figuring out like, what can we do with your current routine? What fits in?
Yeah, that's the hard part about the exercise, where you're actually going to fit it in. There's so much to do in a day, but there is a way to do it. And, we can always fine tune and tweak and make things work. But yeah, there's always a way.
So the other thing you mentioned outside of exercise was nutrition. What kind of nutritional things is the research showing us?
Diet, another very important lever for metabolic health during this transition, especially to target that insulin resistance that we see. It's not really about eating less, although that can be an important component, like Rich mentioned, but it's like fine tuning and seeing where we can optimize and give the body what it needs, or looking at CGM data and seeing how we can tweak things based on that. But really, we want to prioritize protein, fiber, and healthy fats to help stabilize blood sugar and preserve lean muscle mass. So we say to aim for zero point 0.7 grams per pound of protein per body weight each day. That will give you the amount of protein that you need. Some patients may need a little bit more, but 0.7 grams per pound is usually what everyone benefits from. I see a lot of women who don't quite get enough protein. So we have to work on different sources of protein and seeing where we can add in throughout the day. The other important thing is to limit simple carbohydrates like rice, breads, cookies, things like that, and alcohol, of course, because that can definitely worsen insulin resistance and hot flashes. I don't think any of us as we get older can handle carbs very well, myself included. So keeping that in check is really important. We work with patients to fine tune their macros and see what works for them. The other few things that are really important is overall anti-inflammatory diet. Mediterranean diet, I think, is like the most studied diet out there. Definitely a good one to follow. And I would say, like, if you're more active, you can cycle carbs around your workout. If you're going to be really active or go on a hike, you need some carbs for energy and recovery. You can cycle them in that way. And there's a research paper in 2022, which looked at just under 300 postmenopausal women. And it indicated that diets high in processed foods, refined grains, sugar intensifies undesirable menopause symptoms and promotes undesirable metabolic changes. So really focusing on the quality of the diet is super important.
Right. So exercise, diet, those are kind of our two core levers. Now, the other thing we did talk about, we brought it up earlier, is that while the hormonal changes that come with menopause are really a core piece of the puzzle, there is a lot that happens in our own lives that impacts that same trajectory, our stress levels, our sleep, and so on. Do you find that this is something that folks need support with in terms of how to target?
Yeah, stress can be a big one. Lower hormones can definitely reduce our stress resilience. And so sleep and stress management are super important, but they're often underestimated and they're also really not always easy to get a handle of. I always say it's easier said than done sometimes because sleep often becomes more difficult during menopause, but it's one of the most powerful tools we have for weight, mood, metabolic balance. It's like super important to aim for at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. We have different sleep hygiene strategies that we work on as well. Hormone replacement therapy is really important and helpful here too. Progesterone can be really helpful for sleep. Yeah, other practices that I recommend to help calm the nervous system include meditation. Even just 5 to 10 minutes a day makes such a difference. Breath work like deep belly breathing, gentle yoga, vagal toning really can help shift the body into that fight or flight response and kind of help calm our hormones. Lastly, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI, was found to be superior to medications and supplements. Some women find that can be helpful too.
Kind of going into those medications and supplements, I tend to be hesitant of the supplements just personally. And I'm wondering, in that supplement realm, have you seen certain supplements that work, certain supplements that don't work? What are your thoughts there?
Some of the foundational supplements that most everyone can benefit from are creatine, vitamin D, omega 3s, or omega 3 rich foods. magnesium. Magnesium helps to support glucose metabolism, insulin sensitivity, energy production, and stress resilience. And we do see, since we test RBC magnesium with some of our patients, that many of them are under the recommended level that we like to see. So most everyone needs more magnesium in their lives. I love magnesium myself. Those are just some of the foundations. There are many other supportive supplement options depending on what symptoms you're dealing with or things that are going on. One of them, for example, is isoflavones, like from soy or red clover, but really have been helpful for menopausal, like hot flashes. And that's been confirmed in meta analyses as well. And they've shown that the effect against hot flash frequency and severity is 25% superior over placebo and reaches 57% of the effect of even estrogen therapy. They're really powerful supplements. I think, Rich, you had mentioned a study that looked at isoflavones with a few other ingredients as well, right?
Yeah, there was a interesting one I saw not too long ago. It was myoinositol, cocoa polyphenols, and soy isoflavones. Focused on metabolic health, especially with the inositol. There's some good data around PCOS and regulating insulin resistance and glucose levels. But the combination of the three, there are really favorable outcomes. Waist circumference benefits. I think there was some body composition changes that were favorable as well. But of course, the glucose and the insulin were the standouts.
Yeah, but that sounds like a great combo. I love cocoa flavanols. I had a patient who was using it specifically for blood pressure as well. So really good for circulation. Adaptogens like ashwagandha can be really helpful to help regulate cortisol and the stress response. Even calming ingredients like L-theanine and phosphatidylserine also really, really helpful. And there's a lot of good blends out there as well.
Very interesting. Now, you mentioned briefly at the start, Kristen, that for some, if not many individuals, HRT is an option. It can help not just with the weight piece that we're talking about, with the metabolic piece, but also with sleep. Now, Rich actually was assigned our researcher for our HRT protocols many months ago. I was wondering, Rich, from all of that research that you did, any thoughts on HRT you want to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't directly address the Women's Health Initiative. I know you mentioned in the context of family and not discussing or not having access or having this kind of, oh no, like HRT, like with talking like to either grandmothers or maybe even your moms potentially. As far as I know, my mom's not done any HRT. Maybe I need to have a discussion. Either way, it's just, yeah, because of that particular study and the trajectory that ensued for the next 2.5 decades. We're kind of just now digging out, but we were in a pretty massive hole in terms of research associated with HRT. Luckily, that's been improved upon considerably in the last 5 to 10 years. HRT doesn't have to be something everyone does. Some people still have their own contraindications or history, and it's something you should work through with a trusted provider that's genuinely there to support you. But the review data, some large scale meta analysis data, is very favorable. There's a 2022 paper that reviewed menopause and the metabolic effects or metabolic changes associated. It was Jung and Park from 2022, published in Metabolites. That's a really enlightening article. If you want to go have a look at that at some point, we can probably link some of these if they're helpful. Within there, it references 107 different trials. They enrolled over 33,000 subjects collectively. HRT was associated with increased lean body mass, reduced abdominal fat, improvements in HOMA-IR, which is an insulin resistance biomarker, as well as, really positive, reductions or decreases in onset of new diabetes. So HRT has a huge impact. Basically, you're providing the hormones that are slowly reducing or abruptly not being produced at the ovaries. So you're relying only on the peripheral tissues to provide estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So it's worth considering probably for absolutely everybody. It shouldn't be, this whole like, we don't talk about HRT, don't ask me about that. A clinician that says that probably, I would potentially argue that they don't have the patient or the individual's best interest in mind. It should be a conversation. Your history, your individual experience, your risk, all that should be factored in the decision. So we are able to do that at Healthspan. It's really important to partner with the clinical team, ideally a provider, physician, a coach that knows and focuses on menopause based on the diversity of experience, plus the variability and potential for permutations associated with hormones means that you need to include labs as well as symptoms and experiences various well-being or quality of life goals should all be included in that clinical decision making associated with HRT. And it's great to see that at the FDA level and elsewhere, they're reducing some of the red tape or blockades in front of HRT for women.
Yeah, I think that's going to make a huge shift in just women's health as we move forward on the next decade or so. I've learned so much in the last hour. Let me just make sure I got it all. So, Kristen, to confirm what I need to do, I need to lower my processed foods, up the protein, up the fiber, cardio, resistance training, sleep, stress management. Then I find a good health coach like you, perhaps add in protocols, whether it's HRT if appropriate, acarbose, and SGLT2 if I'm having metabolic shifts, a GLP-1 if I'm having those metabolic shifts. How does one decide what to do? You can't do everything, right? Or maybe you can.
I would say start with a meeting with us and we can sit down, have you fill out a questionnaire, kind of see what your goals, what your needs are, what what you can start with, and then we can go from there.
I'm hearing sometimes support is honestly like that first lever that we need to target. Find whether it be a physician for HRT that you feel has your best interests in mind, whether it be a coach that has your best interests at mind, just making sure that who you're going to is someone that you can trust in order to be looking at the latest research, in order to be going away from some of these old taboos that we have with HRT. I think that for a lot of individuals will really open a lot of doors. So thank you for sharing all of that with me. Before we head out, I do want to go around. What should our listeners leave with today? If you had to, in just a short number of words, say something to them, what would you say? Kristen, I'll start with you.
I would say definitely be proactive versus reactive. The sooner you can get ahead of things, the better. Really invest in yourself and your lifestyle habits. You are the priority. Put your mask on before anyone else's. So really take care of yourself.
Rich, any final thoughts from you?
Love the flying reference. That's my favorite. Monitor what matters most to you. It's going to be different for every person, every woman in terms of what's primary focal point, but it should include some mainstays, right? Waist circumference, fasting insulin glucose, comprehensive metabolic panel or lipid panel. Body composition is super important. If you're going to be doing the exercise, it's good to measure it along the way so you can see the progress. Markers of metabolic syndrome, maybe even some liver markers just to make sure that's doing well. And then again, osteosarcopenia, which is a term that combines a reduction in bone and a reduction in muscle mass over time. Some of these are already built into the clinical experience associated with aging as male or female, but particularly for females. But again, starting early, being proactive, as Kristen said, there's definitely some data that she mentioned, like, some of the menopause processes, the ovarian shifts in terms of that starts 6 to 10 years in advance of actually hitting perimenopause or menopause. So start early and monitor what matters.
Thank you. Lots of great stuff there. For me, my key takeaway from the beginning was that this is making up a third of our lifetime. It can't just be something we treat as a short transition phase. It's something we really need to address to make sure our lives are not only long, but healthy. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Kristen. I learned a lot. I'm hoping everyone else learned a lot. To all of our listeners, thanks again for joining us on Beyond Healthspan. Take care of yourself, take charge of your health span. Like, subscribe, leave comments, leave questions. We are here to chat more. Have a wonderful day, everyone.